All right, I'd like to welcome you to the introductory lecture on 1 Corinthians. Here we'll be covering some of the background information. Oftentimes, this is very similar to what you would have gotten in an earlier New Testament class. So let's first talk about Paul and the Corinthian Christ Assembly. To get a sense of what's going on there, we want to talk a little bit about the locations that were visited by Paul by highlighting some of the maps that can help us get a sense of geography. The location of Corinth itself, you can see it highlighted a little better in the map that you're looking at now. And you're talking about a land bridge, and that could quickly get you from the east over to the west in Italy. Otherwise, if you didn't cut through Corinth, you would have to go down south. You can see where Sparta is. You have to go around that area to Cape Malay and then up back and through. So it could function as a shortcut if you were able to get your vessel across that small isthmus there close to Corinth. A little better focus in on the area. So we're talking about the Aegean area, and you can see the Aegean Sea there, and it gives you a little more close-up orientation to Corinth, and then generally speaking, in terms of the broader region of Achaia that Corinth is based in. Paul probably writes 1 Corinthians from Ephesus, so you can get a sense there that he appears to have gone back and forth between these two locations in his mission. Right, so when we tend to think about information that we're going to get about 1 Corinthians, about the relationship with the Corinthians, it's going to come from material in the book of Acts. And in here we're talking about the second missionary journey that's detailed for us in Acts 15:36 to 82. And here's just a map that can give you a general sense of the route that Paul took on this journey. And so this is just building on a reading of Acts 15:36 to 18:22. So from that is, and this is where you'll start to fill in information from your student outline, is that the second missionary journey, we have a dispute over John Mark and the departure for Antioch. And that's detailed in 15:36 to 40. And so this section, if these are passages you're not generally familiar with, you should just take the time to read through these verses. I'm not going to do that here. So after this dispute over John Mark, Paul revisits earlier congregations and goes to Troas and has the Macedonian vision. That's in 15:41 to 6:1. Then, based on the Macedonian vision, he goes to Philippi, which is in the region of Macedonia, and has success in his mission there, but also experiences persecution, seen in Acts 16:11 to 40. And then visits Thessalonica, Berea, and Athens. Those are detailed in 17:13 to 34. And there he continues to have success in Gentile mission, but there's also persecution. And there's also a certain level of discouragement as well. So those are Paul's experiences. So you have this conflict with Barnabas over John Mark, revisiting earlier congregations, the Philippi, other parts of Greece, and then eventually he gets to Corinth in Acts 18, 1-17. There Paul meets Priscilla and Aquila, lives and works with them in tent making and teaching in the synagogue every Sabbath. So Silas and Timothy arrive from Macedonia. Paul's encouraged and then most likely writes 1 Thessalonians during this time. Paul stops tent making and then more zealously preaches to the Jews. Jews resist, and Paul leaves the synagogue and moves next door. So many believe that Paul has an encouraging vision during this time, and then Paul settles into Corinth for 18 months total. And during his 18 months in Corinth, he has opposition and a trial before Gallio, and then more ministry follows from that. The picture here is of the Bema, which is just one of the archaeological remains from Corinth that would have been the location. You basically would set a chair down, and then the Roman procurator would serve as an arbitrator of the case being set forth. And so Gallio is important because of a Gallio stone that was uncovered in Delphi, dating his time in office in the same period that the book of Acts puts for Paul. Then after Acts 18, 1-17, the final travel of the second journey picks up in Acts 18 to 28. Paul leaves Corinth with Priscilla and Aquila. They spend a short time in Ephesus, and there's good prospects for ministry. Priscilla and Aquila remain. Paul goes to Caesarea, to Jerusalem, and then back to Antioch. During this time, Apollos arrives in Ephesus, is taught by Priscilla and Aquila, and goes to Corinth and has successful ministry there. And that's a quick overview of the second missionary journey. The third missionary journey. And some scholars debate this, but it seems straightforward reading of Acts would argue for this third missionary journey. Acts 18:23 to 21:17. See the route that Paul follows on the map here. The maps from this section are all from the ESV Study Bible, so you can always access those online if you don't have the ESV Study Bible, if you want to see those. All right, so in the third missionary journey, in Acts 18:23 to 21:17, Paul revisits Galatia and Phrygia and comes to Ephesus, 18:23, 19:1 and 5. Paul remains in Ephesus 2 or 3 years, Acts 19:1-41, and probably frequent communication from Corinth during this time. Paul hears of a problem and writes a previous letter to Corinth, and in that letter they misunderstand. 1 Corinthians 5:9-11. That passage will come up quite a bit throughout the class, because here's a sense in which they misunderstood the nature of separation from outsiders. And that's going to be an important issue for us when we start thinking about the idea of mission as social identification. Then Paul receives reports from Chloe's household, other reports, and a letter of questions from Corinth. And these are all seen in 1 Corinthians 1:10-17, 5:1 and following, and 7:1 following. These will be these what will be called the peri-de structures underneath in the Greek text, the concerning what you've written type of an idea. So Paul writes 1 Corinthians in response. Near the end of his ministry in Ephesus, around the spring of 56, obviously we don't have specific dates but these are just one reconstruction for a chronology. We get textually a hint for that also in 1 Corinthians 16:8. Sometime here Paul sends Timothy to Corinth. He never reaches there or leaves quickly with no positive results. 1 Corinthians 16 and 2 Corinthians 1. Paul himself makes a painful visit to Corinth and also has no lasting or good results. 2 Corinthians 2:1, 2 Corinthians 12:14, 2 Corinthians 13:1 and 2. Paul writes a severe letter carried by Titus to Corinth, 2 Corinthians 2:4 and 7:8. Paul anxiously goes to Troas and to Macedonia to meet Titus, 2 Corinthians 2:12 and 13, and then also possibly Acts 20 verse 1. Titus comes to him and reports their repentance, and see this in 2 Corinthians 2:7. Paul writes 2 Corinthians around the fall of 56 in relief and to bolster their positive response, 2 Corinthians 7, 5 to 16. And then Paul visits Macedonia, then Greece. This would be the third visit in Acts 20, verse 1 and 2. Paul spends the winter, 56 and 57, in Corinth, and then during this time most likely writes Romans. So he's writing a letter to the Romans from Corinth in Acts 20, verse 3. And the book of Acts details a Jewish plot against Paul, so he proceeds through Macedonia to Troas, to Miletus, to Caesarea, etc., on to Jerusalem. That gives you a sense then of the trip that he's made, and then you can see it going back and ultimately ending in Jerusalem. So chronology is a very difficult historical reconstruction to put together. You have a chronology in your Cradle, Cross, and Crown book that you would have read for New Testament history, literature, and theology. But here's just an outline building on the ESV Study Bible that I alluded to earlier to give you a sense of where we are in the chronology and also similar to what I just covered. So you can see where those dates are and how they align. So these are links and they're active, so you can click on them to get a sense of the archaeology in terms of the material remains in Corinth. Ian Paul has a 14-minute overview that you can click on. There's a longer one on that deals with clothing, and so there's some of the cultural context in Corinth that you can see there. And then finally, there's an intro to a sermon series that I found interesting. This church actually took their pastor and leadership to Corinth and recorded on site there. And so maybe you'll get motivated in a vision for doing a similar thing, or convince your church to let you do the same thing. But anyways, and give you a sense of the archaeology there as well. All right, so this concludes the narration. Of course, this was only about 15 minutes long. This would have been longer in class because we actually would have read through those passages. So hopefully you'll take the time to read through those passages yourself.